Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, March 27th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Putin says that Russia will deploy nukes to Belarus. So, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Saturday that Moscow will deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus at the request of the Belarusian government. So, announcing the decision, Putin compared the move to NATO's nuclear sharing program, under which there are U.S. nuclear weapons deployed to the territory of five allied countries, and that is Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Turkey. So Putin said, quote, "There is nothing unusual here. Firstly, the United States has been doing this for decades. They have long deployed their tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of their allied countries," end quote. And he insisted that these deployments would not violate Moscow's non-proliferation commitments. Putin also said that the decision was related to the UK supplying Ukraine with depleted uranium rounds for its British made Challenger 2 tanks. And depleted uranium is radioactive. It's linked to cancer and birth defects, especially in Iraq, where the US used a lot of these rounds, both during the Gulf War and after the 2003 invasion. And there's still birth defects today because of that. So Putin's saying that this is a response to that partially, but he also said, Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, he's been asking for Russia to deploy nukes for a while. So, in response to this announcement, the U.S. said that it has not seen any indication that Russia is planning to use nuclear weapons. And White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby also said that the U.S. hasn't seen Russia move any nuclear weapons around yet. But according to Putin, the plan is Russia is building a facility in Belarus to store the nuclear weapons, and that's going to be completed by July 1st. Russia has previously provided Belarus with nuclear capable Iskander missiles and is helping upgrade the country's warplanes so they can carry nuclear warheads. So this could have been in the works for a while here. Putin said, quote, "We have already helped our Belarusian colleagues to re-equip their planes. 10 planes are ready to apply this type of weapons. We have handed over to Belarus our well-known and very effective Iskander system that can carry nuclear weapons," end quote. So U.S. and NATO officials so far, they're saying that they don't see a reason to adjust their own nuclear posture at this point, but I could see NATO responding to this just raising tensions. One way that NATO could respond to the deployment is by placing nuclear weapons in countries that are closer to Russia. So far, the U.S. has not deployed nuclear weapons to countries east of Germany that joined NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union and after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. But some Eastern European countries are willing to host nukes, including Poland. Poland seems pretty eager, and Belarus and Poland share a border, so I could see this. The Poles, I think, might be asking, step up their efforts to get the U.S. to put nukes in their territory. And Finland is joining NATO soon, and Finnish officials have not ruled out the idea. They've basically said they're open to the idea of hosting U.S. nukes. I don't know if we're going to get to that point anytime soon, that they're going to put them right on Russia's border. But again, I won't be surprised if this leads to U.S. nuclear weapons being deployed in Poland. And as arms control between the U.S. and Russia is just completely crumbling, and it's just I don't see this heading in a good direction. All right, the next one here. Zelensky says no counteroffensive until the West sends more weapons. So Zelensky said this on Saturday, that Ukraine's counteroffensive cannot begin until the U.S. and other Western countries send more weapons and ammunition. So he was asked, this was in an interview with a German newspaper. He was asked about a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive, and he said Ukraine can't start yet and can't, quote, "send our brave soldiers to the front lines without tanks, artillery, and long-range rockets. We are waiting for the receipt of ammunition from our partner countries. If there is political will, ways can be found to help us. We are at war and cannot wait," end quote. He also said that the military situation in eastern Ukraine is not very good due to a lack of ammo. So, Ukrainian and Russian forces are still battling for the eastern Donbass city of Bakhmut, where both sides are using an enormous amount of ammunition. Zelensky said that Russian troops are using 3 times as much ammunition as the Ukrainian side. Again, he said that they're short on ammo. And Zelensky's comments, this is rare for him to be so kind of candid about how Ukraine's chances aren't looking that well of retaking Russian territory. And what he says echoes comments from a senior Ukrainian government official who spoke to the Washington Post earlier this month on the condition of anonymity, so we don't know who it was. But that official told the Post that Ukraine does not have the people or the weapons to pull off a counteroffensive, gave a very bleak assessment. And here's Zelensky, saying that publicly now. Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front have told several media outlets that they're being sent into what has become known as the meat grinder in Bakhmut with a little support and ammunition. New conscripts are also being sent into battle with barely any training. So the U.S. and its allies have pledged a lot of new military aid for Ukraine over the past few months, but Zelensky keeps saying it's not enough. And the Biden administration wants Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive to make territorial gains this spring. But the prospect now seems pretty unlikely, especially now that you have Zelensky saying this. And one thing that other Ukrainian officials said is that they're just focusing on defending their positions now. So it seems like the current situation could continue for a while. I haven't seen, it doesn't look like Russia's made a move to make their big offensive that everybody was predicting for a while. So still, it's kind of this stalemate with this really heavy fighting around Bakhmut, but there's fighting, across the front, just, shelling and just artillery battles. Not as much as Bakhmut, but still, it's been, the battle lines have been what they are for a while now. Although Russian forces have made the gains around Bakhmut, but that's really it in recent months. All right. So the next one here. So this is from the New York Times. I read it earlier. I can't really give you a proper summary of it, but it's called Stolen Valor, and it's about the U.S. volunteers in Ukraine who lie, waste, and bicker. So it's kind of about these people, these Americans that went to fight in Ukraine as part of this foreign legion that make a public show of it. This one guy they talk about, James Vasquez, I think his name is, just turned out to be a fraud. He's lied about his own military background when he was in the U.S. military, and he wasn't actually under contract with the Ukrainian government or something. Just going around making videos on Twitter, acting like he's fighting in this war. And it also talks about Malcolm Nance, the MSNBC contributor, how he got involved in all this drama between these people. And it's just really, these people are just really pathetic. They're trying to cash in, especially sorry, Nance, Malcolm Nance, he goes on MSNBC and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go fight, the Russians in Ukraine." And he makes a big public show of it, but he goes there for a few months, then comes back and starts selling books again. I bet he didn't even fight over there. I mean, it's just really pathetic. But it's interesting that, to see the New York Times have this about these people. So go check that out. They said another guy lied about, it seems like a good amount of Americans lied about having military experience to get into this foreign legion. And one of them apparently worked at a Longhorn Steakhouse and was a server, but lied about being a manager. So they've lied about quite a few things, these people, to get over there. All right. The next one here. France is willing to work with China on Ukraine. So French President Emmanuel Macron has told China's top diplomat. Oh, sorry. French President Emmanuel Macron, it's actually his diplomatic aide, has told China's top diplomat, who is Wang Yi, that Paris is willing to work with Beijing to find a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. So according to a Chinese readout of the call, Emmanuel Bon, who is Macron's aide, said, quote, France is ready to make joint efforts with China to facilitate the cessation of hostilities and seek a peaceful solution, end quote. The readout said that the French side expressed appreciation for China's positive role in promoting peace talks. The French position is, this puts them in a radically different position than the Biden administration, as the White House has come out against the idea of a ceasefire in Ukraine ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's trip to Moscow. President Biden also immediately dismissed the idea of China mediating between Russia and Ukraine after China released their peace proposal. Biden said the idea of China being involved in the negotiations is not rational. So I thought it was just interesting how different France's approaches here, because still, France and Macron throughout the war, they have, called for negotiations. Macron has talked with Putin, unlike Biden. But still, they are giving Ukraine a ton of military support, and they're all in on the sanctions against Russia. But at least, kind of keeping diplomacy open as an idea. Macron has actually gotten a lot of heat for it from fellow NATO members because one time he said, but he's talking, realistically. He said that in the future, when it does come time to negotiations, people are going to have to take Russia's security concerns. They're going to have to factor that into any potential peace deal. And of course, that Ukrainians got mad at him for that. People in Poland got mad at him for that. But it is just reality. So Wang said in this call that China is hoping to come to a strategic consensus with the EU on the issue of Ukraine and wants European countries to promote the idea of peace talks. So the Chinese readout said, quote, China expects France and other European countries to also play their due role in this regard. Ceasefire, resumption of peace talks, and political settlement of the crisis should become the strategic consensus between China and the EU, end quote. So other world leaders have expressed support for China's initiatives, including Lula, the Brazilian president who was recently elected. And he was actually due to visit China this week, but he had to cancel after catching pneumonia. But before he canceled, Lula was saying that he was going to propose a peace club, as he put it, with China to help mediate an end to the war in Ukraine, sort of a coalition of countries that are pushing for peace talks to mediate between the two sides. So hopefully that idea catches on a little more. All right, the next one here, the US and the EU hold their first ever joint exercises, which are aimed at China, believe it or not. So the US and the EU concluded their first ever joint naval exercises on Friday as the Western powers are stepping up military cooperation that is aimed at China. So while most EU members, I believe 21 out of 27 EU members are members of NATO as well. So most of them are already NATO allies of the US. This does mark the first time that the US formally conducted naval drills with vessels operating as part of an EU force. So the ships that took part, an American guided missile destroyer, and then a Spanish naval ship and an Italian naval ship. So not huge drills. The Spanish and Italian ships that participated are part of the EU's naval force operations Atalanta, which is an anti-piracy mission that operates off the Horn of Africa and in the Western Indian Ocean. The location of the drills was not disclosed, so we don't know really where these took place. But again, these ships are part of that. It could have been in the Indian Ocean. And they took place on Thursday and Friday. So China was not mentioned by name in either the US or EU statements on the drills, but they said this was part of, what they call working to support a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is kind of that US jargon for, an Indo-Pacific, which stretches, from India to Hawaii, this huge region that is, still dominated by the US, that they view China's actions there as a threat to the U.S. Hegemony in that part of the world. So that's what it's all about. According to the State Department, the exercises were the result of a decision made at the last round of the EU-U.S. high-level consultations on the Indo-Pacific. So I guess those are talks that the U.S. and the EU are holding on that region. And as part of its military buildup in the Asia Pacific, the U.S. has been rallying its allies to join in on the provocations aimed at China. In recent years, the UK, France, and Germany have sent ships to the South China Sea. The UK and France have sent them through the Taiwan Strait. I don't think Germany has taken that step yet. But that's a pretty big aspect of what the U.S. is doing over there is bringing in its European allies, of course, with the AUKUS pact, the thing between Australia and the UK, bringing the Brits over, as part of this submarine deal, which upset the French because apparently Australia was supposed to purchase some submarines from France, and then they made this whole big deal with the U.S. and the British, and the French didn't even know about it until it was announced, or until just like a few hours before it was announced, they were told about it. All right, so the next one here, Indo-Pacific Command seeks $3.5 billion more than what Biden is asking for the 2024 budget. So Indo-Pacific Command, that is the command responsible for that big stretch of the world from Hawaii up to Mongolia, down to India, down to Australia, over to New Zealand. So it's a huge swath of, ocean and territory that this U.S. command is responsible for and wants to, maintain dominance over. So they're asking. So President Biden made his budget request for 2024, and Indo-Pacific Command is saying you're not giving us enough. We want $3.5 billion more than what Biden has requested. And just to show, how much is going into this command. So there's 5 other U.S. military commands. You have CENTCOM, NORTHCOM, which is North America, U.S. European Command, Africa Command, and these commands, they're also asking for a little more than what Biden has requested, but not nearly as much as Indo-Pacific Command. Put those 5 commands together, what they're asking for isn't even half of the $3.5 billion that Indo-Pacific Command wants. And they're likely going to get what they want because Congress is, all in on China, on going after China, and they want to spend more on confronting Beijing. All these members of Congress are saying, Biden's military budget request isn't enough. We're going to add to it. So they're asking for a lot of things, and the biggest chunk of this $3.5 billion ask is $511 million for what they call regional campaigning to quickly mass forces multiple times a year as part of a synchronized set of operations, activities, and investments. So to quickly mass forces, it sounds like some kind of drills or just maybe deploying more forces into the area temporarily, sort of a dry run for when there is a war. Maybe it's something like that. And the command is also looking for a lot of missiles. They want $357 million more for the Extended Range Standard Missile 6, which is a missile used by the U.S. Navy. Also $493 million for more Tomahawk missiles and $151 million for the Precision Strike Missile. And the request also includes $147 million to upgrade missile defenses in Guam. So those were the big ticket items here. They're asking for a bunch of other things as well. And so Biden's total military budget request for 2024 is $886.4 billion. And $842 billion is going to the Pentagon. And of course, when asking Congress to sign off on this, the Pentagon is saying this is going to help us prepare for a war with China in the future. All right. So the next one here, President Biden is committed to keeping troops in Syria. So White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, he's really become the face of the administration lately since he went over to the National Security Council. Kirby used to be the Pentagon spokesman. I think he's an admiral in the Navy, or I'm not sure if he's technically retired or not. But he said Sunday that the president is committed to staying in Syria following a series of attacks on U.S. bases and U.S. airstrikes in the country. So Kirby said this on CBS News' Face the Nation on Sunday. He said, quote, "Here's what's not going to change. The mission and ISIS is not going to change. We have under 1,000 troops in Syria that are going after that network, which is, while greatly diminished, still viable and still critical. So we're going to stay at that task," end quote. When asked if President Biden was committed to keeping U.S. troops in Syria, Kirby replied, "Absolutely." So while Kirby's saying that this mission in Syria is about fighting ISIS, it's clearly about, putting the squeeze on Syria, as I always, go over. So I won't hit that too much. But I just have to mention, the sanctions, the crippling sanctions meant to prevent the reconstruction and the fact that the U.S. is occupying their oil fields, keeping that resource from them. That's what it's about. And the U.S. occupation, as demonstrated by this recent escalation, it always risks sparking a wider war. So the escalation started on Thursday. A U.S. base in eastern Syria came under a drone attack that killed a U.S. contractor and wounded 5 U.S. troops. The Pentagon claimed that the drone was of Iranian origin, but offered no evidence to back that up. They still haven't. President Biden responded by ordering airstrikes that hit targets in Syria early Friday against facilities that the Pentagon said were used by groups affiliated with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, likely referring to the Shia militias that operate in Syria. So, according to the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, they're a pro-opposition group. They're very anti, Syrian government. According to their sources, the U.S. airstrikes killed 19 fighters, including 3 Syrian troops. So I guess that's Syrian government troops, 11 Syrian fighters in pro-government militias, and 5 non-Syrian fighters who were aligned with the government. So these numbers are not confirmed. That they're the only place I saw offering, a casualty number. And both Iran and Syria issued statements accusing the U.S. of lying about who they targeted. Iran claimed that the strikes hit civilian targets, so it's not exactly clear what happened. And the U.S. airstrikes provoked more attacks on multiple U.S. bases in Syria. On Friday night, 3 U.S. bases, 2 of them that occupy oil fields, I know that, came under rocket and drone attack, and 1 U.S. soldier was wounded. Nobody was killed, but of course, it provoked more. And there were some reports that there was more U.S. airstrikes after that, but apparently that wasn't confirmed, and the U.S. did not report anymore. So, but again, this could just always spiral out of control. And here you have the Biden administration, the White House saying, no, we're staying. We're not going anywhere because of ISIS. But it's not about ISIS at all. And what's so ridiculous is that this is already being repeated by the media. I didn't put it in the article, but I saw, the Pentagon says since 2021, the U.S. bases in Syria have come under 78 attacks by what they call Iran-affiliated or Iran-backed groups. So every single rocket and drone strike that targets U.S. bases, and it does happen a lot, they're saying is these Iran-affiliated groups. But aren't they there to fight ISIS? Wouldn't you think ISIS would be shooting rockets at them if that's why they were there? So it just doesn't make any sense. And the thing is that they don't know who's firing all these rockets, especially if they're the Katyusha rockets that everybody has in that region, and even the drones. Like there's small drones, anybody can get their hands on them, so they don't really know. It's just all part of this narrative that it's Iran attacking them, when really there's a lot of people in Syria that don't want the U.S. to be there, including ISIS. And ISIS would benefit from the U.S. fighting Iran, from fighting these Shia militias, because they're all enemies of ISIS. So, but if they're fighting, they're preoccupied, and ISIS can, grow stronger, because of that fighting. So the U.S. just has to get out. I mean, it's the only reasonable option here. All right. The next one, Janet Yellen admits that sanctions on Iran create a real economic crisis, but have not changed the behavior of the government. So this is the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. And she said this last Thursday at a congressional hearing. She said, quote, "Our sanctions on Iran have created real economic crisis in the country. And Iran is greatly suffering economically because of the sanctions. Has that forced a change in behavior? The answer is much less than we would ideally like," end quote. So Yellen admitting what always happens. History shows us that sanctions do little to change the government, but they always hurt ordinary people in the targeted country. UN experts just said last month that more Iranians with a blood disorder are dying due to Western sanctions that deprive them of specialized medicines and the ingredients needed to make them. So not only are they blocking the medicines, but also the ways that they can be made domestically in Iran. And that's despite all these claims that and these exemptions that the sanctions have for medicine. But it goes to show that doesn't prevent medical shortages and food shortages. in these countries that are under all these sanctions. So there you have it. Yellen admits it. If a country is suffering greatly economically and there's a real economic crisis, of course people are hurting. Ordinary people are hurting. And if it's not changing the behavior of the government, and Iran's been under these really heavy sanctions for a few years now, the Trump administration started imposing them again in 2018. So it hasn't done anything to change the government. It's actually made the government more hardline. They elected Raisi. And so what's Yellen's solution here? Oh, she said that they're going to keep increasing sanctions. They're going to look for ways to strengthen the sanctions. So this is the continuation of the Trump administration's what they called the maximum pressure campaign against Iran that did nothing but escalate tensions in the region, hurt ordinary people, and made the what they considered the moderates in Iran that were more willing to work with the US. They were voted out because of this. So this is the result. And Iran has found some relief by increasing oil sales to Asia, to China. And that's what the U.S. has been targeting with their new sanctions. And the U.S. has also ramped up sanctions on Iran over its growing military relationship with Moscow, which is a natural result of both countries facing similar Western pressure. All right, the last one here. So this is kind of big. Things are really going on in Israel. Netanyahu dismisses his defense minister after judicial reform criticism. This is from Middle East Eye. Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, he dismissed defense minister Yoav Gallant. And this is a day after Gallant publicly criticized Netanyahu's judicial reform plans. And he is from Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party. He recently spoke out against the judicial overhaul. He urged Netanyahu to suspend the legislation, resulting in his sacking. So breaking ranks the day before, Gallant had called for the legislative process to be stopped for a month. And his call came just before the Knesset lawmakers are set to vote likely Monday on a central part of the government's proposals, which would change the way judges are appointed. So, Netanyahu just fires somebody in his government that, kind of seems mildly spoke out against his judicial overhaul plans, just put him on hold to kind of think about it some more. And this has sparked more protests. There's huge protests going on. There's people in the military refusing to, do their service all over this judicial overhaul. And also there's all this violence in the West Bank. A lot of Palestinians are being killed. That on top of this, it's just things are really seem to be spiraling out of control in Israel. So we'll see how everything plays out here. But I don't think Netanyahu's threatened, to be losing his position anytime soon. He still has that majority in the Knesset, and unless some Likud people turn on him over this firing this defense minister. That's it for the news. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Ted Snyder, The Myth of a Stronger NATO. We have one from William J. Astore, America Hangs from a Cross of Iron. We have one from Branko March Teach for Putin. Iraq War marked a turning point in U.S. relations. That's over at Responsible Statecraft. Ray McGovern, The Banality of Biden's Exceptional Elite Advisors. And then our spotlight is from George O'Neill over at The American Conservative on the Iraq War, Bad Lessons Learned. And then our picture story is an interview in the New York Times with Daniel Ellsberg, and it is titled The Man Who Leaked the Pentagon Papers is Scared. He's talking about the state of the world that he's going to be leaving behind, with nuclear weapons and just how high tensions are now between the U.S. and Russia, and the risk of nuclear war is so high. But that's it for today. Hope everybody had a good weekend. You could always support us, antiwar.com/donate. Also like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or Rumble, Odyssey, share it around, all that stuff. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.